So I'll introduce the panel. So first off, James Thomas from IBM and Apache OpenWhisk. He's kind of here to represent the serverless kind of side of life. Then we've got Tanner Nelson from Vapor, obviously, kind of one of the main frameworks, but also representing the Swift Server Working Group. Is that what it's called these days? Yep. We then have Sean Stevens, who's CEO of Perfectly Soft and TreeFog, kind of looking more at some of the business side of problems as well as representing Perfect. Ian Partridge from IBM Katura, another kind of big framework, some of the enterprise stuff, as well as another Swift Server Working Group member. And then Kaitlin Mahar from Mongo, kind of looking at some of the Swift language stuff that we're missing, and kind of more of a coming from an outside perspective as well. So I've got a list of questions, because I can just keep talking. So we'll start off with those, because I think you're fed up with my jokes, if I can find my Trello thing. So we kind of touched on this a little bit earlier, but this is kind of related to the server working group and how it's going to interact with the language team and stuff like that. And what do you see, or kind of any of you, of the key things that Swift is missing to be able to kind of jump to the next level in the server world? Yeah, nice, easy question to get started. Who wants to take that?
Hello? Is that working? Can you hear me?
Oh.
Hear me now?
Have I muted it? I have muted it. There you are. Try that.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
I was the least smartest person sitting on this panel, and sort of the business guy. I think one thing that's missing is many of the other languages have a big claim to fame of something that they're running. That you know, some massive like Facebook. I think there's a Wikipedia article which lists all the major social media networks, etc., and what they run. And I don't think Swift is listed there. I haven't checked in a while. And so from an adoption standpoint, just in the general adoption standpoint, we're missing one of those. So hopefully one of you guys are working on that.
I think one of the big things was the I/O layer, that we didn't really have like an agreed upon way to do I/O, and then also the concurrency model and like how we would basically handle that. So I think now that we have Swift Neo as kind of like a way to agree on that, that will help a lot with helping packages kind of like work together better. But yeah, there's kind of like a lot to figure out around there. And yeah, so hopefully you guys all will go to the forums thing that I posted and kind of like weigh in on this, and that'd be awesome.
So I think probably one of the other big pieces is what came out of Stan's talk earlier today when he surveyed the IDE and editor ecosystem. It's kind of a painful watch, really. Stan, you did a great job setting it out, but it's not brilliant at the moment. So the fact that we have SourceKit on Linux now is progress, but I think getting better IDE and tooling support, both when you're actually coding, but also better support in Swift Package Manager and some of the broader tooling issues as well is going to be totally crucial for adoption, especially since the primary audience for server-side Swift at the moment is obviously people who already know Swift, and that's iOS developers, and iOS developers are used to a good development ecosystem and experience. So giving them that is going to be crucial to growing the pool of people who are building their backends in Swift.
I think just kind of the ecosystem and the maturity of the packages will probably be the big thing. I think my experience, not being a mobile developer and coming from back-end development and starting to get into Swift, was, as much as everyone likes to laugh at JavaScript, like it does have a fantastic, like mature back-end, NPM, 10 years old now. And Swift Package Manager and things like that are just much newer, and there's fewer packages, and it's not always clear which package is the best to use. And like, especially if you're doing back-end development, it's like, does it even compile on Linux? And there's a lot of like, you try a package, sort of compiles, and then you work out it's running some foundation bug, and then you try another one. So I think just the maturity of the ecosystem around tooling, if you're looking at bringing in developers who who aren't just mobile developers and want to do back-end development. That's just really important, and hopefully in a couple of years, then you'll have a much more mature ecosystem. Because I think that's something that definitely felt a lot newer, basically, and it would be a bit of a shock to someone who's escaping from JavaScript.
Cool. Thanks, Ronald.
Sorry, I have a question around that. So do you see that server-side Swift is going to attract more front-end developers moving full stack, or full stack developers who have used or done server-side in the past and are moving across? Or where do you see the biggest growth in our community coming from?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the right answer, but I definitely think, if you look at the JavaScript community, which is kind of my home, what's the most popular thing in JavaScript at the moment? Like TypeScripts, right? They all have these like 100 other languages that compile down to JavaScript, right? And it turns out some languages have types built in. You don't need to like intermediate compile them down. And so we should tell people about this stuff. And then, I think I've seen some notable people kind of escaping from the JavaScript world and going to Swift. I think there is, and for, in the cloud, you pay often for memory, right? That's a big thing. And Swift is very performant, right? And languages which are more performant cost you less, right? And so especially with serverless, you get a real big understanding of what bits of your application are costing you because you pay per use. So there's a big competitive pressure to use languages like Java is a bit rough when you're using serverless. So I think from backend development, if the ecosystem matures, it could be a really popular choice. But I'd be interested to hear what other people think, because I've quite a narrow view.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the kind of experience that the experience I've seen and the people I've seen come on board, especially mainly from the Vapor community, because that's kind of where I come from, is generally independent iOS developers who are going, I need some sort of backend service, I don't want to learn another language. And I think the majority of people at the moment in the community are kind of coming that way. Although having said that, I know that certainly nodes have basically gone all in and sort of forced all their PHP developers to learn what a compiler is and things like that, and kind of join the Swift world. And so hopefully at some point there'll be some kind of convergence in the middle, and where people pick up a back-end language from scratch, having no existing any languages, and go, I'll choose Swift from the get-go. Oh yeah, that's a good point. So if you started to get into server-side Swift, having done iOS development, let's say, raise your hand. Pretty much most of the room there. Did anyone come from non-iOS and go into serverless? Okay, there's actually more than I was expecting there. Yeah, cool.
What languages were you doing before you escaped and came to Swift? Just shout out.
No judgment.
PHP.
Ouch.
Hi.
Ruby.
So PHP, right? That could be a one Python. Wow.
Back in the day.
Far too clever. Come and help out in OpenWhisp.
It's right in Swift.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. So actually, most of the questions I had written down, we kind of just touched on for all of that conversation there. So what I'm going to actually ask you to do is, if you have questions, if you submit them on Slack, because that's probably going to be the easiest way, so it kind of helps with the recording and not have to go around. And I'll kind of keep an eye on Slack and then kind of ask them the questions to the panels. So let's kind of go along the row, and kind of a bit of an outlier question. What made you get into server-side Swift? Why did you choose server-side Swift?
I'm a complete serverless fanboy. So, I just love it. And I've drunk the Kool-Aid, and I'm a true believer. Our platform just supports Swift, and IBM's heavily involved in Swift. So when I was just tinkering around and trying different runtimes, it just seemed really nice. And then I obviously, read the book and was like, this is awesome. Right? It's got types. The compiler tells you that your code's going to be break before production. So, yeah, that was my background. I just got into it, liked it, which is obviously a very different heritage than most of the people in this room, which are like hardcore iOS people.
So like I said earlier, in 2015, I was a back-end developer and an iOS engineer, and I was doing PHP, so don't judge me either. And as you can imagine, I would be doing like half my work in PHP and then half my work in iOS, and every time I had to switch back over to PHP, it was like even more painful. So that's how I got into it, basically. I saw that it was possible to start using Swift on the server, and I was like, I really, really want to be doing that.
You heard Kyle's story where we came out of the Lasso development world, and there was a huge development community there, but everyone there has a long white beard and has difficulty moving over that beard. Wait, is this being recorded?
Yeah.
Whoops. So we really wanted to find something more modern and that we could use across the stack. And as we were getting more into mobile applications, and we saw Swift, and it's beautiful. It's just the way it's written. Everybody loves it. Everybody loves writing with it. And then when we started to look at the implications of memory and CPU usage, we saw that there was actually huge savings there as well. So there's a competitive advantage that we can take to any one of our larger clients and say, look, we can save you money, we can prove it mathematically, so we should be building in this. So really there's a whole bunch of reasons why it makes sense to use Swift on the server as well as on the front end and as well as doing everything. We got in a lot of trouble at the beginning because we if you remember our website when we first launched before Swift open sourced, we said one language to rule them all. And that mentality that having one great tool set that you could use for scripting, you could use for front end, you could use for building computer games with, you could do anything you want with it, meaning you can do that. And then lastly, I was lying in bed with my 7-year-old son. Instead of reading, we were playing on playgrounds. And I see that what many people have probably missed is that in 5 or 10 years, Apple's really smart about this. They've started training children from this tall to learn Swift, not learn JavaScript, not learn PHP. I mean, that would be cruel to teach child PHP. Sorry. Yeah, but the idea is that we're sort of ahead of the curve here because playgrounds is awesome, learning Swift is awesome. So
Get them while they're young.
So my background is from enterprise Java. So I spent 10 years working on JEE. Actually, I was a developer of IBM's JVM. Of course, the JVM runs Java, but it itself is written in C and C++. And so when IBM got involved in Swift and they needed people with kind of runtimes expertise to help with porting libdispatch to Linux and bootstrapping Foundation on Linux, I got involved that way. What's kind of kept me interested, apart from the community that's grown around this, is the whole story around modern native languages. So I think Marcin's talk earlier today about their use of server-side Swift in production was a real kind of excellent story about the benefits that people can have from that. And it doesn't matter if it's Swift or it's Golang or it's Rust, although I think Swift is the most beautiful out of all of those. I think people are tired of these kind of heavy, slow, interpreted or fast and high memory usage languages. And Swift has just been a total breath of fresh air in that way.
So I guess I used to sort of mostly just use interpreted languages. Like my background's mostly Python and JavaScript. But then I started at MongoDB, a little over a year ago. And since then I've mostly been using compiled languages. And I kind of decided I like those better. And then in, I guess, January, this opportunity came up to start working on this new Swift driver project that I alluded to earlier in my talk. And so the scope of that was originally just, we're going to build this driver for mobile. It's not a full driver, not necessarily meant to be used for server-side Swift. But turned out I really, really liked writing Swift. So after we sort of finished what was required for mobile, I wanted to keep doing it. So I'm still very new to server-side Swift, but I'm here to explore it.
So as someone who has a very kind of deep background in kind of interpreted languages, what are the benefits that you see, or the attraction of Swift kind of compared to those languages? What are your kind of favorite parts of Swift that those languages don't have, and vice versa?
Well, like now when I try to switch back to writing Python or something, I feel like it's just like so much harder for me because like there's so much I rely on the compiler to do for me now. I mean, you guys all probably know this. So I'm like, oh, well, the code ran correctly, but like I never actually tested the code under like this else statement, right? So like I assume that it works, and then it ends up breaking in some other time. Or I'm like using something as the wrong type or something. So while sometimes like typing can be annoying, I also just feel like it helps me write way better code.
Cool. There's an interesting question that's come in on Slack from Sujit. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Who's asked, so how can we get people involved, and how do we get people to contribute to the open source project? Because, I mean, almost everything on server-side.swift is open source, including kind of Swift Neo all the way up to the higher levels. And how do we encourage beginners to kind of I know certainly from when I started kind of getting involved in the server-side.swift community, it can be quite intimidating because you have no experience in server-side, you might not have any experience in Swift, and you kind of, how do you encourage people to kind of get involved with that without putting them off and getting trapped in the kind of Stack Overflow, I'm better than you mentality?
Yeah, so I think it depends what your existing skills are. It's true that if you want to contribute to the compiler or to bits of foundation or whatever, then you're going to need some C or C++ skills. But if you're wanting to look at something high level, I'd make a real pitch for people contributing to something like Swift Neo, because it's all Swift, so you have the skills already, and there's a huge green field there for filling out that ecosystem, whether it's new protocols, new codecs. There's a real need to broaden that pretty quickly. I think Tanner mentioned that in his talk this morning in terms of the database drivers as well. It's actually surprisingly easy to get started in that. But of course you can scratch your own itch as well. So if you're a user of Kitora or Vapor, then we both have Slack and Discord channels full of helpful people who want to grow this community of contributors. So I would say scratch your own itch and start with an area where you've already got the right skills.
I would say one thing as like a person contributing to other things, I always feel like I don't want to be like annoying or something, if that makes sense. I submitted a PR to Swift, and every time I'm commenting on it, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm bugging the overlords of Swift, with this thing. Which is crazy because whenever I see people contributing to Vapor, I'm always so happy and so excited, and I want to help them. So I think there's that kind of like disconnect when you're contributing to something else, and even I have difficulty realizing it, but realize that if you contribute to the projects, the maintainers will be really excited about it.
You're doing their work for them.
Yes, exactly.
Pretty
Please
much.
do my work for me.
It's a great feeling when someone does that for you.
Yeah.
So at Try Swift San Jose this year, which was run kind of on the last day of Dub, they ran a kind of contribute to Swift Package Manager, Swift Neo workshop, where the guys from the core team of Swift, the package manager team, the Neo team, kind of all came together, and anyone could join and anyone could come and contribute to Neo. And it was really interesting kind of watching people there who obviously are, they're very good coders, they have strong coding backgrounds, but they kind of feel intimidated. And even if it was just fixing a bug in documentation, teaching them how to fork the package, how to submit a PR, and then get it merged there and then, and see kind of, oh, actually, this is really easy. It was kind of they really kind of started to get engaged. And I think encouraging things more like that would be a really kind of good way to kind of grow and build the community.
I would say, interesting enough, on Perfect side, we suck at being open source. And what I mean by that is, unlike these guys, we came out of a non-open source world, and so not knowing how to start a community or how to get people involved or how to answer questions, and we sort of spend a lot of time hiding under our desks. And so I'd be fascinated from our side, and we'd love feedback on how to be more open source-y, because we genuinely, we're all in on the open source idea and kind of approach it in an odd way. So we've been watching these guys and going, okay, what could we do better, and how could we change things to bring? We're all working in it together. Rising tide lifts all ships, right? So the more people we can get into the Swift universe, the more tools we have, the better it is.
Yeah, companies stepping into the open source world is they get very scared. So I actually have a normal job apparently, which is working for the BBC although I seem to spend very little time there at the moment. And I push a lot to kind of open source stuff. So we have a media player that we've talked about for about 2 years of open sourcing, which would be great because it's a very fully featured media player that works on both. Well, there's 2 versions that work on Android and iOS. It wraps some of the system stuff. It provides very good high-level abstractions for doing things like live rewind and kind of seekable ranges and stuff like that. And there's nothing stopping us from open sourcing it apart from people getting cold feet and going, like, we should open source this. Yeah, we really should. Why don't we do it? There must be a reason why we can't open source it. And I think kind of pushing them to take that first step can be quite intimidating, and realizing that no one's going to judge you. And even kind of coming from a personal point of view, the first package I wrote to sit on top of Vapor, whenever you write something open source and you publish it on GitHub and you do your first push, you're going to go, the whole world's going to judge me. And in reality, like, most of the packages you write, no one's actually going to look at. And even if they do, they'll be grateful because you've written something that they can use. And so I think kind of getting over that fear is kind of something that people should do.
We made some big mistakes early when, for example, we chose the GPL. We got, like, people were at our door with sticks going to beat us. And we were just like, we just chose what everyone said we should choose, and we went the wrong direction. And then, all of the implications of switching licenses, we had to figure out what those were. So it's fascinating. Sometimes when you get into the open source world, I'm not going to say it's welcoming. So that's part of the scary part. But once you're there, it's all warm and cozy. It's the question of how do you get by those first few steps.
So Stefan on Slack has asked, what does the future of server-side.swift look like? It's a very open-ended big question. Why don't we kind of go for everyone's opinion?
Oh man, that's a tough one.
Other than like this conference being there every year and both sides of the Atlantic.
Yeah. I mean, I think the beginning is, so like the past 2 years have kind of been like the frameworks working kind of in their own silos, making things for themselves, and kind of each person reinventing the wheel for certain things. So I think that the future will hopefully at least look like one giant ecosystem kind of like working together and filling the gaps that need to be filled, like kind of as one unit, which is how obviously a lot of the other ecosystems work, like web framework and languages. So I think that will be kind of like the difference of how it looks going forward, at least hopefully.
I hope we'll see the end of Cocoa Pods. And
controversial.
it is totally part of server-side.swift, because what are people going to move to? Hopefully they're going to move to Swift Package Manager. And well, yeah, once we fix some of the problems in it. But having a coherent package ecosystem, I think, Jamie, you mentioned that earlier, is really crucial. The fact that you can do npm install and there's a package registry is key. We need a package registry for Swift for the long-term future. So yeah, broadening the package ecosystem is going to be totally crucial to long-term success.
Yeah, the Swift Package Manager team did a presentation at DubDub this year where they basically said, this is our vision for what it should look like, but they want the community to kind of contribute to that and come up with suggestions. Because I think Apple have done a really good job with Swift and Swift Neo, and kind of, instead of their usual thing of hiding something away, building it, releasing it to the wild at DubDub or in September, and then all of a sudden people going, well, actually I wanted to do this. They've kind of, with the open proposal and having everything kind of going through the evolution process where anyone can contribute, they're kind of getting that kind of wider range of the community that they just wouldn't get of being closed source. And so if you have ideas on how Swift Package Manager should evolve, I think you should definitely kind of join the forums on swift.org or get involved in the Slack channel and kind of help contribute, because you can change the direction that the community and the industry is going in.
When you say future, are you thinking like a year from now, or 25 years from now, or 50 years from now?
Whatever you want. I mean,
Because what's fascinating about that is where do we all sit in a year from now? I think that's a fascinating thought. And then what are we going to be doing in 5 or 10 or 15 or 25 years? As you start to think about what are the effects of Swift, I was just saying my kids are learning Swift. So in 10 years from now, I think Swift has a huge future that we're really just scratching the surface of right now based on what Apple has done and based on what other things have done. One place I see that we'll probably get more and more into is this guy, Chris Latt something, who's involved in TensorFlow now, I believe. Is that right? Somebody here probably knows better than me. There's a huge opportunity there for a connection between AI and machine learning and Swift, which I think we're just starting to poke at with the end of our finger. And I think there's a huge future in it for us there. That's 5 years, 2 years, 1 year from now.
Personally, I'm looking forward to WebAssembly and kind of going the other way in the future of actually being able to execute Swift back on the client. So kind of go from the client back onto the server, then back onto the client, and then have the death of JavaScript. But, that's me being optimistic.
Did you just say the death of
JavaScript? There's a fan there.
Any other languages we want to kill while we're up here?
Yeah. We'll go there. So we talked about the package ecosystem and about how we need to be better at kind of making it more discoverable and having kind of official list of packages or kind of recommended packages. So Stephen has asked, are there any open source frameworks or packages that we should kind of talk and promote that we haven't mentioned so far today? Like what are some good packages that we haven't actually talked about? I know, Tanya, you briefly touched on the Swift Package Manager library. A quick introduction about that, and then if anyone has any other ideas, especially have we got anything from Mongo that might be coming out?
So lib syntax, I think they just added it to the Swift or the Apple repo like 3 weeks ago or something. But basically, it's like a new way for analyzing Swift code and like parsing Swift code. I think it's a replacement for SourceKit, if I understand correctly. But the cool thing there is that unlike SourceKit, where it's like this thing running in the background, I thought SourceKit used Objective-C, but apparently it runs on Linux. So, but the cool thing there is that it opens the door to metaprogramming in a much easier to do way, which I think Swift could really benefit from. That's something that I get requested all the time. People are like, metaprogramming, like please do scaffolding in the toolbox and all of that. The only problem with that right now is that it's just really hard with SourceKit to do that in a clean way. So I think that could be a really cool package coming up, depending on how it all works out.
How about out there? Anyone out there know of one?
Yeah, let's get some suggestions from the community. Like, what are some good packages that people use on the server side? No one uses any packages in ServerSide.swift, apparently.
Straight Swift, 100% Swift.
Yeah. I think there are some. So I know Skelpo have got some. If you look on their open source GitHub project, there's some really good things. They've got some really good JWT packages and doing user manager stuff. For kind of like a ready-built user authentication package, that's really useful. It seems to be picked up a lot.
One thing that I think will be really big when we finally get it is some sort of like a unified cryptography package. And that's something that we're trying to figure out right now. So if you have any ideas on what that should look like, definitely chime in on the forums. I think if like a conversation doesn't start about that soon, I'll probably post something. But it's really hard to do packages like JWT without that layer yet. Like for example, Swift Neo supports WebSockets, which requires a hashing algorithm to implement that. And since we don't really have an agreed upon crypto library, they actually have to import some things and then just like hide them because they don't obviously want to like release that API. And so that's a route that we could go, but having a shared crypto library would make it so that we could be using one thing and make it a lot easier to implement stuff like JWT and other auth things that need crypto. So,
well, that gives me a nice segue into the next question. What are the top 3 missing packages for server-side-swift? So we've just mentioned the kind of unified crypto library. Has anyone else got any other kind of suggestions of packages that are really required to get Swift to mainstream?
Does Swift have like left pad? Does anyone remember a bit of a JavaScript joke? Left pad. There's this thing where they unpublished a package and broke the internet.
Oh, yeah.
So now I'm under joking.
Any other missing packages? I know login. I have about 60 unread emails from the discussion on logging on the forums that's kind of started as a kind of unified logging thing for server-side.swift. Anything else?
Yeah, the logging is a big one because that's something that no matter what you are and like no matter what framework you want to go in, that you need to have that as like a shared thing. So I think that's one of the things the working group's going to try to concentrate on first, just because of how many packages that would touch. I also think it could be interesting to look into shared low-level HTTP library. So obviously Swift Neo exposes HTTP types, but something a little bit higher level than that, that gives you like an HTTP server and an HTTP client, so that maybe even things like middleware could be shared between frameworks. I don't know if that's a stretch because middleware are kind of opinionated in how they work, but I think it could be interesting to explore that. I know like Go's net package has HTTP in it that's a little bit higher level than what Neo offers. So I think that could be interesting for sure.
From a serverless point of view, I'll let Ian has a...
I was just going to say that I think one thing which would be really cool is if we could broaden the number of protocols. So gRPC would be awesome. I think everyone would love to have some gRPC. Avro, Thrift, MQTT, AMQP. There's all of these missing pieces which other ecosystems have available. So filling that out is really important.
So,
there was one that we were looking for recently, which was PDF writing, and maybe that exists, and we haven't found a good one. But the ability to create a PDF, write to it, or import a PDF, write on top of it, those kinds of things. Is anyone doing that already, and I just don't know of the package?
There's a C library that people use that they wrap that.
That's C. Come on now.
I know.
We do everything in Swift here.
So, touching on that and going from kind of some of the things that would be good to have on kind of a base, maybe not a language layer, but kind of agreed upon Swift Neo kind of at that kind of layer. From a serverless point of view, if you have an agreed upon I/O layer, HTTP client layer, does that help grow serverless Swift? Because everyone's kind of using the same framework rather than having to build upon a thing to call out so you can use serverless Swift.
I'm not sure. I think serverless Swift has a good future because I just think for many mobile developers who aren't used to back-end development and don't really care about it, like it just gives you a good opportunity to jump in. If you can write some Swift functions, you can basically write a serverless function really quickly. And I do think there's a parallel between, if you think about JavaScript, right? You go back to like 2008 when Ryan Dahl stood up at JSConf and launched Node.js. Like you had a huge community of kind of front-end JavaScript developers, and then Node came along, and it just opened all those developers up to doing back-end development. And now JavaScript is like the biggest language in the world. And I think for mobile developers, it's obviously a huge community, but my experience of talking to people is the back-end is always like someone else's responsibility normally. And it's like I get an API, I talk to it, those Java people. And so I think just the growth is going to be enormous, really, both in server-side and serverless. I've got a bit of a segue, but I think the growth is going to be really interesting. And I think just I think to get my experiences were to get the foundation libraries like literally 100% on Linux, so there's nothing missing would be, and then to get all the packages, making sure they compile on it, getting them moved to Swift Package Manager, that would be the big thing, right? No little random bugs in Foundation that you run into.
Switch out Foundation on macOS to Swift.
That kind of stuff. Just no cross-compatibility. There's still, we're still running into things with Foundation where you're like, it kind of leaky abstraction, that kind of stuff. So I think when that's all done and some of the threading, like async await. Again, you'll laugh at JavaScript, but async await is amazing, right? And every other language is trying to copy it. So, like, to go back to promises for me is a bit rough now. So, async await, like, it's incredible.
I think C# did that first, not Java. JavaScript. So one point I just wanted to make, which I think would help both serverless and server-side.swift, is a really good HTTP client which doesn't rely on libcurl. So if you're watching very closely in James's talk where he did the API which called out to Coinbase to get the Bitcoin API, obviously that's an outbound HTTP request. You use Katura Net to do that because we have a little API built into Katura Net which lets you make an outbound HTTP client request. Currently, the implementation of URL session in Foundation sits on top of libcurl. We did it that way because we needed something really fast. URL session was kind of table stakes. We had to get that working really quickly. But longer term, we need to remove that dependency, and that will benefit people who are writing both server-side applications and people who are writing serverless actions. Because if you're writing an OpenWhisk action, quite a lot of the time you want to chain them together, and it's crucial to be able to do that.
Cool. So, a question, or as I read it, oh yeah. So, Alexandre, I think I pronounced that right. Yeah. In a company whose backend is entirely written in Ruby, how do you convince the CTO to give server-side.swift a chance in production, other than sending them here?
Is it a microservices architecture or a giant monolithic Ruby application? Which I don't really have to ask that question, do I? If it's in Ruby, it's a giant monolithic application. I would say the first thing, because we've had this question before, and we've sat down with CTOs on many occasions, and the answer is find one thing that is really the bottleneck in the whole application, and pull it out and do an example build of how you can make that extremely performant, and show that in that one place you can achieve incredible performance gains. And what's fascinating is you don't have to attack the whole thing. You can attack a piece and stop thinking about it as a giant application.
I don't know if you could this is to the boss, was that the question?
CTO, yeah.
CTO. Okay. Well, CEO or CTO, it's different. But okay, CTO. I think that the developers will be happier working in Swift, so they'll want to work on the project more. And that was me when I had to work on the back end in Swift. I would always want to be working on the Swift project more, so I would put more time into it and care and think about it more. And then the PHP, I was just had to kind of get it out of the way. So maybe you could try to swing that angle.
I think also there's a talk tomorrow. Our closing talk is how to convince the client.
Yeah,
so
there you go.
That should be quite interesting as well.
Don't miss that.
Ruby developers are pretty hardcore, though. Trying to convince Ruby developers to move, that's tough.
Yeah, I don't know. I wouldn't know.
So a good question that came in from Steve, actually. Have you seen any novel web applications built upon Swift that surprised you?
No.
No, I think that is. No. Okay, that is no.
Swift itself,
Yeah?
surprisingly good.
Yeah? Okay, cool. That was an easy question, wasn't it? So Martin has asked an interesting question. It's very kind of more high level. Why did you start coding, or what got you into coding and computing, or technology in general, and what keeps you coding, or what inspires you to keep coding? People really don't like their jobs, do they?
So I wrote a text editor in Visual Basic. And I think everyone kind of has that moment where they write something for the first time and it does what you expected it to, and it's amazing. And then you go, oh, right, I'll add the next feature, and then it doesn't do what it was supposed to do. And then you discovered what debugging is. What keeps me engaged in it actually is, firstly, beautiful code. I think we've all looked at certain code bases and thought, wow, this has really been designed in a really elegant way. So I think I can kind of appreciate the beauty of it. But what's kind of also keeps me engaged is the people that I work with. So nowadays, where I'm in more of a team leader role, although I still write a fair amount of code as well, it's about the enjoyment I get from working with newer developers, younger developers who are just coming into the industry and in my team, and helping them to kind of become established professionals. I get a lot of enjoyment out of that nowadays.
Let's go up there. Yeah.
I started programming as a freshman in college. My high school didn't have any sort of computer science, but I always really liked sort of math and puzzles and that kind of thing. So I think it really makes sense that I ended up liking it when I tried it out. Why I've stuck with it, I guess, it's like really satisfying to get things working, to solve cool problems. Even though writing code is familiar, I feel like I'm constantly learning new things while I'm writing code. Getting to learn new languages, different applications of those languages is really satisfying. And now working full-time, being out of school, I really like, in particular, working at a company where we're all sort of building different components that end up fitting together, because we have like MongoDB, the database itself, but then so many things that are related to it, or this mobile project that the Swift driver was for, or that kind of thing. So just like, I don't know, the design of abstracting these things into different parts end up fitting together really well is really satisfying. Like writing like elegant idiomatic APIs is really satisfying. Yeah, I just kind of like solving puzzles, I guess.
My first programming was a website. I don't know if that counts, but I think I was like 12 or something, and I was on this really old computer that didn't have an internet connection, and I was like really complaining to my dad that I was bored, so he was like, here's this book from my programming class I took in college, and I was like, oh my gosh, I can make a website, so I opened up Notepad, and I was like, HTML, background red, and I was like, whoa, it's red, this is so cool. And then after that, I just always loved it. I don't really know why. I think I know why I like Swift so much, and especially Swift on the server, and it's because it's like this really pure experience. Even like better than Swift on iOS, because there's kind of all that Objective-C like lurking in the back. You know it's there. It's kind of disturbing. On the server, I think it's really cool, especially getting to design a framework. It's just like this really pure experience of like getting to design something from start to finish, and yeah, I don't know why it's so fun, but it is.
I'm just trying to remember. I think that I kind of learned to code in my teens and just kind of taught myself in my bedroom, as many young teenage boys do. And just like from a book, right? I had like a book, and it was about C, and you just read the book, and you typed stuff in, and nothing worked, and it was like a nightmare, and there was no Stack Overflow, and there was just like nothing to help you. It's very frustrating. But I kind of persisted, and yeah, and I think I was just kind of fascinated, right? It just seemed amazing. It's kind of time the internet was kind of taking off, and it just got kind of easier and easier, right? Now you have GitHub, and you have Stack Overflow, and you have Slack, and I think, yeah, it's incredible. I mean, I remember open source sort of pre-GitHub, and it was a pretty, you think it was kind of rough place now. Like that was tough then even to get involved. And open source is a bit like, open source is like big projects like Eclipse or Apache. It wasn't that it's so easy to just turn up and contribute. There were, open source is even just like big things like the Linux kernel. And so I think that GitHub came along and really changed everything, and it's fascinating. And I think what keeps me coding today, especially doing back-end stuff, is I'm just amazed how easy the cloud is making it to just do incredible stuff, right? Or you have just APIs for like everything, from making telephone calls for machine learning, and they all have these ridiculous free tiers, and you can just pull stuff in and create really, really amazing kind of apps to do whatever you want with minimal work, and it costs nothing. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time, really. And yeah, I think GitHub really did change everything. It really did change everything. It's just made it so easy. And I think open source has kind of exploded since then, basically. It's kind of like a Cambrian explosion phase because it just really lowered the barrier to entry. And it's changed the war for the better, basically.
I'm going to answer this question very differently because I actually don't code very much anymore. Years ago, I was a professional musician, and then I had children, and they ruin your life, and I had to stop playing music because I had to make money, and I started coding. And the sort of that pure creativity that you get out of a musical instrument, actually you get when you're coding. I know you've all felt this, I'm sure, that I'm building something, I'm making something, and I accomplish it. And then, as I was coding, and I was deeply involved, I built the Leap CMS and other things and spent many, many years in front of a computer. And then I started to manage people and lost the time to be able to code. And I got to tell you, be careful, because as you go through your coding career, if you stop coding completely and the muscle starts to weaken, then you wouldn't believe how much I miss playing guitar, but you also wouldn't believe how much I miss coding every day. You're missing a piece of you, if that makes sense.
I first got into computers when I must have been about probably 7 or 8, and my dad brought home this massive tower, kind of yellowy plastic PC from work that had been chucked away.
The memories.
It
brings a tear to my eye.
It was running Windows 3.1. Yeah. And he renamed a folder on the hard drive called Tim, and that blew my mind. And that was it. I was in. I was hooked. And then I picked up a few books, from programming, and then when it came to kind of choosing university stuff, I hadn't really done any kind of computer science or programming, so I was doing maths at that point. But the universities I was applying for in the UK, you had to take an entrance exam to do maths, and I tried some of the entrance exams, and they were really hard. So what I worked out was you can actually go and do computer science, where you do half maths, half computer science, and then just switch to maths after the end of the first year as a way to kind of subvert the entrance exams. And then I realized, actually, I don't really like maths very much. I much prefer computer programming. And that's kind of how I got involved. And now, I think the thing that keeps me involved is, the community, like being part of something like this, and it's really unique in the kind of last 15 years of I've been programming, or however long. It's like I haven't really been involved in something that's kind of had the same buzz and excitement about it. And also, it's a very unique opportunity for you to create the first X. So it could be the first package that does this, the first thing that does this, because it's such a young, growing industry. So that's kind of really fun and exciting. So when Swift matures, I might get bored, but we'll see. So we have time for 2 more questions. So we're going to do one kind of fairly big, kind of deep thought question, and then we're going to have one quick fire round. The first question is going to be about diversity. So as an industry, we kind of have a bit of a problem. You can kind of look around, and most of us are male, most of us are white. What can we do as an industry?
He's got green hair.
Yeah, true. What can we do as an industry to kind of help promote that? I was watching a talk by Paul Hudson last week, and he was talking about how Swift has a problem because the whole core package team is all male, despite the fact there are some other people in the community, some women in the community who are heavily involved and contribute more than anyone else. So how as a community, or a ServerSide.swift community, can we promote a better, more diverse community? I mean, nice, easy question to get going, nothing too deep.
I can answer a couple of ways. One interesting part is that maybe the representation in Europe is mostly white males, but we were recently in China, and it was obviously there was many more Chinese there, or Asians, than there were European males, and we also have a huge following in India, and even people from Africa. So we have an interesting representation. I think where we really fail is on females, is in terms of, if we're talking about diversity in general, is there's a gender issue there. But I think that issue starts at childhood. So I was saying I lie in bed with my son. I also have a daughter. So it starts there. So I've been spending as much time trying to teach my daughter how to code as my son, because I believe that's where we all learned at that point and moved forward.
Any other opinions?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing is, like, I mentioned I didn't start programming till college, and I think we kind of need to dispel the notion that, like, you need to start programming as a kid, or, like, have parents who are programmers that, like, introduce you to computers or that kind of thing, because, like, some of the best programmers I know didn't code when they were kids. And if we say that you have to start early to do it, like, it's even less likely that, like, we're going to be able to engage these kinds of people. Otherwise, I think just like being someone, like if you manage women, then like you should try really hard to be cognizant of the opportunities they're given relative to men on their team, and that sort of thing. And just, I don't know, listening to what they have to say. I feel really lucky at MongoDB because we have a really good women and trans coders group, which has been like a really great network for me to meet people. So I think sort of pushing for those kind of efforts at your companies, pushing to like fund them, even if it's just like funding for all the women engineers at your company to like go out to dinner together once a month or something like that. Like having that kind of support network has made a really big difference for me. And I think that helps people stay in industry once they get there. Yeah, I don't know.
In the UK, we have a charity, I guess, or kind of thing called Code Club. And it's basically people give up the time, volunteer their time, and they spend like an hour a week going into primary schools or secondary schools. So that's ages 6 to 13 for anyone outside the UK, because everyone has very different year systems for school. And it's really interesting to see kind of the involvement and the enthusiasm from everyone at that age. But the thing that struck me is that girls at kind of around 11-year-old age make far better programmers than boys do. It was quite an interesting thing to notice. So
IBM is obviously heavily involved in women in technology events and sponsoring those kind of things. And personally, I've recently got involved in our hiring process. I was kind of curious about the people that were applying and were being attracted to IBM, and I wanted to kind of see for myself and be involved in some of those decision-making processes. And now that I am, I can say that it is completely egalitarian and it is entirely based on merit. And certainly, once people are in the team, and there are women on the Katura team, we make every effort to ensure that equality of opportunity is there for everyone.
Cool. Right, so it's 20 to 6. So remember, everyone, we have drinks hosted by Swift Engine at the Dorint starting at 6 o'clock. So I have one last question for the panel. It's going to be a quick fire round for everyone in the panel, which has been suggested by Stefan again. And this is so I don't get any sleep tonight, is what is the one feature request you'd like to see for the raffle project for tomorrow for raffling off the rest of the books? So the feature request for the raffle app that I'm going to write tonight. Any ideas? Okay, so you know how we raffled off the books today?
Yes.
So tonight I'm going to build a Swift web app to do that rather than using Google. Have you got any feature requests?
Well, it obviously has to use the new random support coming in Swift 4.2. So I think as long as you do that, you're fine.
In order to be buzzword compliant, it needs to have some sort of artificial intelligence.
AI.
AI, yeah.
And it needs to be non-blocking too. So.
Right. I think SPM is going to just grind to a halt with that one. Don't think the package manager can handle that. Cool. Okay, well, thank you so much to our panel who've got roped into this kind of over the last day or so to spend an hour of their time answering my benign questions. So please put your hands together for the panel.